Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Connect Conversations. Today's conversation is all about managing cultural change and is brought to you as a part of Mobius Connect's ongoing YouTube series, Connect Conversations. I'm Kim Fugger, and I'm the manager of Mobius Connect, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. First, I would like to take a moment to introduce the host of Connect Conversations, global reliability improvement experts Doug Plucknette and Ron Moore. Hi, guys. You here with me?
Yes, we are.
All right, fantastic. Well, before I pass the microphone over to you guys, I want to encourage our audience here today to submit any questions that you have in the question panel. And Ron and Doug will be more than happy to answer your questions throughout our time here today. Your questions will be aired anonymously, so no need to worry about getting called out. Again, go ahead and submit that at any time during their talk today. All right, Doug and Ron, I'm going to go ahead and pass things over to you.
All righty. I see we've got Drew Troyer with us. Hey, Drew. Long time
no see.
Hi,
Ron. How are you? I couldn't miss the opportunity to hear you speak. How you doing?
Don't set the standard too high, you know.
So. Well, it's nice to see you. I hope to see you in person soon, Ron.
Yeah, well, good. You jump in here if Doug and I say something, stupid. So
absolutely, you're certainly welcome to join us and talk and give your input as well. That makes it easier on Ron and I. We always look at each other and say, "Do you got 5 more minutes that you can do?"
Yeah. So, anyways, cultural change. We're going to talk about that today. So, just a little preface for it. A fella over in England, he works with a company. He did. I don't know where he is now. Works with Ineos, and he said, "Culture. That's what people do when the boss isn't around." And I thought that was a good characterization for the culture of a business, and in this particular case, we're going to be talking about mostly industrial plants, manufacturing plants, that sort of thing. We're not going to be talking about changing a nation's culture or anything that grandiose. So I want to start maybe with a kind of a bullet form summary of what I think about managing cultural change.
Can I just say one thing before you start?
Yeah.
The hourly guy's view is culture is what happens when the corporate folks are away from the hourly folks.
Right. Well, that's similar, kind of logic in there.
What they do when each other's not around.
Yeah. So anyways, culture, well, a lot of folks out there say, well, people don't want to change. And that's a pretty common, reaction to, we need to change the culture. Well, people don't want to change. Well, I disagree with that. In fact, I disagree with it strongly, but there's some caveats to that. And caveat number one is you got to provide people with a compelling reason for change. If there's no compelling reason, then there's a lot less motivation, emphasis, whatever it may be, for that change to occur. The second point, really important point, is there's got to be something in it for particularly the shop floor and for really all the employees in the company. It has to be something in it for them. You can't just say, well, go out and change. I've given you a compelling reason, go do it. So a compelling reason doesn't have to be, or something in it for them rather, doesn't have to be money. It might be less stress on the job. It might be making it easier for, folks to get the work done. It might be making it a safer place and maybe money, so. And the last thing, and I think the most important thing is the folks doing the change have to participate in creating the change. So they have a sense of control, purpose, ownership, that sort of thing. So we've got to create an environment for them to be able to participate and contribute and to some extent control, so that, the changes that occur, they don't feel like they're being shoved down their throat. In fact, quite the opposite. They feel like they're helping make the changes. And if you do that, you'll have a greater sense of ownership, greater willingness to, implement the changes and so on. So those are just, I think 3 really important points about managing cultural change. Doug, I've yammered on enough. I'll turn it over to you.
All
And Drew,
right.
you can jump in too, maybe after Doug's done.
I look at this. I had a conversation with someone not too long ago that told me that the culture change was just a great excuse for poor performance. And I said, well, I'm not so sure about that. I worked for a company a long time ago that went through significant culture change. In fact, it was, a change in technology that darn near put them out of business. And watching that culture change from people that seemed highly motivated and able to do anything to folks that just kind of did the duck and cover to keep from being noticed for the next layoff. So culture can have a huge impact on people and how they perform. And when I work with companies today and they ask about that, how do we change the culture here in this plant or this work center or this department? The things I talk to them about are, look, if you're going to do this, if you're going to talk about doing this, just like Ron said here just a couple minutes ago, you got to involve the people that it impacts the most, right? You don't need to spend $100,000 or anything like that with a consulting company to do this. It really simply takes leaders that are willing to ask questions and listen, right? Methods that I think about when it comes to changing company culture is really starting out with defining what a healthy company culture looks like, right? And there's lots of articles and stuff like that, and it doesn't hurt to share those with people. But I'm the type that says, bring them in a room and have this discussion, and you'll be surprised if the folks in the hourly floor, shop floor, what they want and what they'd like really matches up with what the folks in corporate would like to see. So defining that is really the first step. What does good look like? What does comfortable look like? What is, and not so much even comfortable, what does a culture that inspires people look like, right? That's really the first step. And I think that in doing that and then sharing that vision with the rest of the folks that weren't involved is a good starting place. Now, how about you, Ron, or even Drew, for that matter? What is your starting point?
Well, I'll
Go
go
ahead,
ahead and then I promise we'll give you a chance to get in here, Drew. So,
Well, it's not what I was looking for, but I'm willing to help.
well, I mean, if you don't have anything, that's okay too. We don't mean to draft you necessarily, but I know you've got, you're well respected, certainly by me. So, anyways, we talked about one of them. Articulate a compelling reason for change. Okay, and maybe that you're on a burning platform, and if you don't change, you die.
Right.
Or maybe the market's expanding and you hope to get a chunk of that to secure the future of the business, but you need more capital. But you got to make more money to finance that capital expenditure. So, it's earning the right to a future, earning the right to more capital so you can, build more plant and go after more market share. Or maybe somebody got killed on the job site and don't want that to ever happen again. Or, maybe it's something else like, I don't know, we save lives. Maybe you're in a safety company and that's one of your, primary objectives is saving lives. But it's really up to the company to define and articulate the compelling reason for change. And then after that, maybe, or not maybe, you got to communicate. If you're the boss, you got to communicate your strategy, your goals, and roles. Now, I know that seems pretty obvious, but some executives, they'll come out and they'll do that, and they'll check that box, and they'll go back to their office, and that's done. Well, no, it's not done. In fact, you got to repeat it over and over and over and over and over until people say it to you before you say it to them. It's got to become almost second nature, embedded in the culture or the mindset of the folks out there. And, just speaking personally, I've made that mistake. When I was president of CSI, I'd go out and give a speech, blah, 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 and go back to my office and say, check that box. Well, there's a problem with that. First problem is people only heard about maybe, a half or a quarter of what you said. And of that, maybe half of that stuck. And a week later, half of that or all of it's going to be gone. So, if it's something really important, you got to just repeat it. You just got to say it over and over and over. And, after that, maybe apply leadership and management principles, the Warren Bennis model. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but, Warren Bennis said leaders do behave in one, set of characteristics and managers behave in another. And so leaders are always looking for, a way to grow, build, change, improve the business. Managers are looking for stability. So, those are different kinds of mindsets, but you need both. Maybe you start out with a leadership approach that is challenge the status quo after you articulate a compelling reason. And then after that, after you get the change made, then you have to stabilize it, with procedures and standards and checklists and audits and, the usual stuff, and along the way, again, you got to have folks doing the work, help you identify the things that need to change so they, participate and there's something in it for them. And, then somewhere in there, you got to measure the results. You got to communicate, give people feedback about how well you're doing, thank them, congratulate them. And you may have one or two folks out there that are ne'er-do-wells, ne'er-say-wells, and you might want to challenge their behavior and do your best to get them involved in the changes. And then, of course, after you go through all that, you got to stabilize all that, like I said earlier, with procedures and standards. And then one more comment, and that is a lot of folks, my impression is some folks out there think that, once you change the culture, it's done. It's like a project, you're finished. Well, you're never finished. You've got to be constantly repeating those steps, maybe in an evolutionary process, as opposed to a revolutionary process. But it's not something you're ever really done with. It's something that has to be constantly encouraged, promoted, supported, and so on. So I'll hush. I've rattled on too much, probably. So, Drew, you got anything to add to all that?
Well, you hit on a couple of important points there, Ron. So the WIFMs, the WIFMs for most people, are they making a decent living? Do they have job security and safety? So I think you were the first person really to correlate reliability with safety, which I think a lot of us believe that safety performance and reliability performance, and I would say probably environmental performance, they all have a lot of the same underlying root causes. And so I think you were the first person to do that. But, one thing that I think is sometimes overlooked, and it's rewards. So when I was a young engineer, I had a project because, I've got a little bit of background in lubrication. And I had a project with one of our big American automotive manufacturers, and they had some injection molding machines. As we were transitioning in the 90s to, cars being made with more intricate and sophisticated plastic molded parts, the machines became higher pressure and much more sophisticated, more servo valves, things like that. So they were having trouble. I went on, so your problem is contamination. So I mapped out a plan for them to clean it up. Say, great, you need to train our guys. And so I trained the guys. I got to tell you, 29-year-old engineer training a bunch of 55-year-old artisans. I was probably 150 pounds soaking wet. The average automotive millwright's probably 300 pounds. It's just like, I'm training these guys, and I got to tell you, Ron, they did not like me one bit. They were cursing at me. I felt physically threatened. During a break, a master millwright walked up to me and he said, Drew, he said, it's not that they don't disagree, or that it's not that they disagree with your message. They know what you're saying is right, but you're talking about taking away their hunting cabins, their fishing boats, so on and so forth. I said, what are you talking about? I didn't say anything about hunting and fishing. He said, yeah, well, about 30% of their pay comes from overtime. So I'm asking for reliability, but what are we paying for? We're paying for failure. That's a WIFM issue. And that got me thinking to back when I was, the young guy that had to go out on call outs on the weekend. Well, if you get the plant back up and running on a call out, the next Monday, the plant manager will seek you out and pat you on the back for getting the plant up and running. So we have extrinsic rewards in the form of overtime pay. We have intrinsic rewards in the form of attaboys and recognition. We are literally rewarding precisely the behavior that we don't want. That's our leadership, and that does not create a good culture. When was the last time you saw a plant manager go out and recognize a guy for doing a good field balance or doing a good precision alignment or running a good grease route? I think that rewards are possibly the overlooked area in culture. And I know that we've all heard this in terms of metrics and KPIs. What gets measured gets done. In reality, what gets measured gets rewarded, and it's what gets rewarded that gets done. So that'd be my 2 cents to add to that.
Yeah, relative to facilitating employee, if people do a good job, like you just said, reinforce good behavior, it's not always more money. I mean, if you go out and say, thank you, good job, what else do you see out there? Or if you put a little blurb in the local newsletter or something along those lines, just a recognition of the contribution that folks are making, that I think that goes quite a ways.
Long way.
And of course, I would throw some money in there.
Sure.
Because if the company's making more money, some of it ought to go to the folks that made that possible.
I've talked to managers about this, and sometimes you get them over the line, and you mentioned managers versus leaders. And sometimes a manager will say, well, if the guy's not working overtime, I can't pay him more money. I said, hell yeah, you can. You're the big winner. If it's not working overtime, but your plant is running, you're really the big winner here. So what we have to do is we have to make reliability the preferred choice. Because I got to tell you, I'd rather work Monday through Friday, 40 hours for X amount of pay than get that same X amount of pay for working 50 hours with 10 of them on call out on a weekend. And something, the plant's going to be much better off for that.
Yeah. Well, I've got a ball game I want to watch on the weekend.
You're right. Absolutely.
or visiting grandkids or something,
Something. Anything but slugging over a broken machine, right?
Yeah. By the way, just a side comment, I've got data that says environmental performance improves with improved reliability. I got that too.
I would like to see that, Ron, if you'll pop that over to me. I'll give you my newest email. I'll just put it in the chat, but I would really like to see that. I appreciate that.
Okay. I've only got a couple of data points. One's at a refinery, and where's the other one? Chemical plant. Yeah. So anyways.
I'm actually giving a presentation next week in Cincinnati on utilizing reliability engineering methods to improve energy efficiency. So simple things, managing parasitic friction through precision lubrication, alignment, and balance, and eliminating fugitive emissions. We send 20 to 30% of our compressed energy, compressed air and other gases into the atmosphere. So there's a lot of simple things that we can do, all of which improve the reliability of our equipment. So I'm not surprised at all. Not surprised at all.
Doug, we've ignored you for a minute.
I was thinking about going and getting an umbrella for my drink. But along the lines of what Drew just said, Chris Colson and I wrote a book on that a few years back called Clean, Green, and Reliable. There's a lot of good information in there. And the one thing that we did not get in that book, because we were kind of pressed on time to get it out, was that business case to have a company to sit down with and push every single one of those items that we talk about through to see how reliability impact is their environmental performance. And I have a good suspicion that there is a direct relationship, no doubt. So getting back to cultural change, one of the other things I talk about is what is the company culture at multiple levels? I mean, we talked about that thing. Ron told a story about what the person told him that culture is what happens on the shop floor when management leaves, but there's really culture at all levels. So there's culture in your corporate offices, there's culture in management, there's culture in marketing people, culture in the salespeople, culture in research development, engineering, maintenance, sales, you name it. There's a company culture there. And how does that match up with what your overall culture is? So I think, if you're looking at this at a corporate level, which a lot of companies need to do, they need to look at those multiple areas and compare them and say, what's going on here, right? Where do we match up? Where do we different? Because they really should be that vision, which is what creates a culture or should create your culture, right? How is that conveyed across to all of those organizations, and how do they match up with that? The next step of that is certainly in doing that type of audit and asking those questions. What are the areas of concern? Write those down. I can tell you, we've talked a bit about safety. One of my assignments at Kodak was safety leader for one of our divisions. So I had about 300 different people that I oversaw in terms of safety performance. And one of the things that we did, and we always had a pretty good record, but there certainly was a couple of work centers that had areas of concern. And that was, is there really an open door policy to come in and talk about those things, right? And I had one particular area that I had a couple employees come to me directly and say, hey, whenever we go in and talk about that and express our areas of concern, nothing ever gets done about it. And they were, in fact, at the point where they said, we'd rather you not address it with our boss. How do you solve it there, right?
Yeah, that couldn't be good.
Yeah, and that becomes the challenge where you get the bosses all together and say, hey, look, there's a couple areas that have some concerns that when they have open door issues, those issues don't get addressed. All right. And magically, who you think speaks up?
Yeah.
The person whose area of concern, the guilt feeling was there. And you just say, hey, if this is going to work for us as a company, you have to pay attention. That doesn't mean that you tell somebody I'm not going to do anything about it. You need to at least listen and let them be heard, right? And say, what are some ideas we can do to make this better, right?
Or if it's a bigger issue, you might say, look, I understand it. And right now, here's why I can't do anything today about it. But
Sure.
Here's what I plan to do. But if you can't do something, you need to tell folks why you can't, so that at least they'll understand. They might not agree,
Yeah, but
you haven't ignored it. It hasn't gone into a black hole somewhere, and they think, well, hell, those guys just don't care, So now back to incentives, I guess, one of the things I think that will facilitate a much better company culture across all those functional boundaries that you mentioned earlier is if you have measures that facilitate collaboration as opposed to conflict. So shared measures that are at times in conflict with each other, that folks have to work together on in order to make the right decision overall. So I'm sure you guys have experienced probably many times the fact that production is held accountable for on time, in full, quality product out the door. And maintenance is held accountable for maintenance and repair costs and maintenance schedule compliance. Well, those two are very often in conflict. And you know who's going to win? The production guy is going to win until the machine just flops over and dies, at which point the maintenance guy wins because you don't have a choice. Well, that's not a good situation to be in. So if I were the boss, the production manager and the maintenance manager would both be held accountable for production schedule compliance, maintenance and repair costs, and maintenance schedule compliance, and reactive maintenance for that matter. Hold them both accountable for 2 or 3 measures that impact one another, so that they make better decisions about what needs to be done for the business as a whole.
I think that's a smart comment, Ron, because when you go down function by function, sales and marketing guys, they're trying to maximize revenue. Production guys trying to maximize revenue. Maintenance trying to minimize cost. Procurement, supply chain trying to minimize cost. Who's looking out for the bottom line? Because maximizing revenue and minimizing cost is not the mission of the organization. It's maximizing profit. Right. So we need to have these metrics, and they're compound metrics, compound KPIs that force collaboration and cooperation. Maybe force is the wrong word. Inspire, hopefully.
Facilitate.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and the other one is holding, for example, these days purchasing usually runs the storeroom. It didn't used to be that way, but it's that way today, because it used to be that the maintenance guy would have 1 or 2 of everything. They'd have a spare plant in the storeroom. And well, that's not good. Well, nowadays the purchasing guy usually reports to accounting. Well, they don't want anything in the storeroom, ideally, because that's working capital, not working. Well, if I were the boss, I'd hold them both accountable for 2 things. One is inventory levels, inventory turns. Yeah. And the other is stock out rate and the impact that has on production and maintenance costs and maintenance efficiency, that sort of thing. So, and those 2 measures are very often in conflict. But if you hold both parties accountable for both measures, then they're not going to, abuse one another, I hope, unless they just flat don't get along. And you could probably think of other examples where, well, I'll give you one more. The marketing and sales, I worked with a company that had, Lord, I don't know, 300 different products. And so they were doing changeovers, every hour or 2, or a lot of changeovers. Well, it turns out, 5% of their products made up 80% of their sales. Well, that's where the money is. What are you making that other crap for? But the marketing and sales guys were incentivized vis-a-vis commission to sell the high margin products, but those high margin products weren't. They induced a lot of operating costs during the changeover process, and you actually lost money, and they actually made money, right? They got a lot more in their paycheck. So, it's those incentives that you put in place that has to facilitate doing the right thing for the business overall. And the other thing is, if you do that, you'll have a more collaborative culture across the organization, and the production guys won't think the maintenance guys are a bunch of jerks, and like vice versa. When if you facilitate, that more of a collaborative environment with the measures. So that's one comment. Another one I would give you is this. Bob Kelleher, a colleague, I guess I'd call him. He says about 30% of the workforce is truly engaged. About 50% of the workforce is disengaged. And about 20% of the workforce is actively disengaged. Yeah. And the analogy I use there is you got 10 guys on a rowboat, a crew, right? And 3 guys are pulling on the oars really hard. 5 guys are sightseeing, they're just kind of, paddling along, doing the minimum, and 2 guys are trying to sink your boat. Well, just imagine if you could stop the 2 guys trying to sink your boat and get a couple of guys sightseeing, pulling on the oars. That would dramatically improve performance. And I think the way you do that is you get the guys sightseeing to actually start doing things within their patch that actually help the business. And you go try to engage the guys who are actively disengaged, engage them in something more productive. Anyways,
well, there's a truth to Ron, what you're saying is absolutely true, but sometimes you have to accept the fact that if you can't change the people, you got to change the people.
yeah, well,
It's a reality.
There's a corollary.
I'm getting a chuckle out of this because just as Ron began to tell that, we had one of those questions come in that is from a fellow that says he recently worked with a company that wanted and needed cultural changes in their smaller plants scattered across the U.S. They had 43 at the time, but wanted to do all the work remotely with no face-to-face meetings or discussions. The process was not very successful. I was getting good communication and change involvements with about 10 sites. There were about 22 that were always hit and miss. And then I had 11 that did not communicate any involvement at all. It was mentally exhausting. Interesting how those numbers match up with the example you just used, Ron.
Yeah.
You guys think that culture change can happen remotely? That's the question he really intended to ask.
No.
I agree with you, Ron. Not a chance.
So.
Not a chance.
I've been trying to do it through this whole COVID thing, and it just doesn't work out. You just got to. It just doesn't work. Maybe I'm old. We're old guys and everything, but
I'm older than anybody here, guys.
Well, and this also falls into what we call the 50-mile rule. Right? It's if you come from more than 50 miles away, you're a genius.
Yeah.
It's amazing how that works. It's honest. Most of this comes down to now, with the exception of those ones that are actively fighting against, because they don't care who they're talking to, right? Or who's talking to them. Yeah. Most of the people, this boils down to listen, document, have conversations, and develop action plans, right? It's really that simple. And the problem is we all lead busy lives, right? Especially the higher up it seems you go in the company, the less time you have to interact with the people you should be interacting with.
Yeah.
Right. I wish I could be the person that said, hey, all you managers out there, you have to dedicate a certain percentage of your time every week to shop floor interaction. Right. And shop floor doesn't mean just the manufacturing part of the plant. It means the people that are in sales, the people that are in marketing, the people that are in production, safety, operations, you name it. You got to give some time to that. So across the month, you could visit and interact with 4 different aspects of that. Right. It makes a difference. People need to see who their leaders are. Right. They need to see and have a belief that they care and that they hold stake in the company just like you do.
Yeah.
So
I couldn't agree more with that, Doug. I'm just reflecting on, my experience. I used to make it a point to find open slots in my calendar and go out and just roam the halls and talk to people and find out what was going on and, ask them what they needed. And, so that you become, you're not some guy sitting in the office that nobody knows. You become, I hope I did, become a resource to folks where they felt like they'd be listened to. And I think that's what's it called in that Japanese method, Kenchi Genbutsu. Go and see.
Yeah.
If you want to know about the problems with the work, talk to the workers. I mean, my goodness, how obvious can it be? Yeah.
All right.
I had one comment about Drew's, change the people. My philosophy is that there's no such thing as a bad employee, but there may be a couple that need to be employed somewhere else. They're not bad, but they don't fit into your environment. And so they've earned the right to go work somewhere else. Grant them their rights. and
That's
you
true.
know they'll be happier.
Guys, I
So,
got to jump to another meeting. It was great seeing you both. Always a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to when we can get face to face again. So,
yeah, likewise.
all right,
And
guys. Cheers.
maybe one of these times we do, we get a regular panel on here, right?
There you go. There
We
you
go
go.
get, I saw you just had some time with John Schultz out in Vegas. There's a few people that we could pull in here and have a little round table with, all right?
Yeah, well, let's do it in Vegas. It's a little dangerous with Schultz. Yes. See you guys later. Thanks.
Take
Bye.
care, Drew.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
So, anyways, I think we've covered most of what I wanted to mention something else. You know, it goes back to that point I mentioned earlier about, that managing cultural change isn't something you do once and it's all done. It's something you're constantly working on. But a kind of a corollary to that is this: if the change takes longer than organizational attention span or management, executive attention span, it is doomed to failure.
No doubt.
Constant. Deming had a phrase: constancy of purpose is essential. And so there are times, several times now over the past 25, 30 years, where we make really good progress in engaging the workforce and, getting things, improved and a better culture. And the guy leading that leaves. And a new guy comes in. He knows nothing about what's transpired, or, well, nothing, very little about what's transpired over the previous, 2 or 3 years. And managers are like dogs. Every dog's got to mark his territory, and he comes in and marks it, but it doesn't quite map into what you've got done already. So unless you've got some sort of a succession plan that indoctrinates the new guy in the methods and the techniques and the successes and all that sort of thing, then they're not going to be very receptive. They may want to change everything. So that that constancy of purpose is essential. And I've seen too often where you don't have that. You don't have good succession planning, and new guy comes in and just kind of peas all over everything. So I think that's a really important point. And to go with that, like I said earlier, you have to embed those changes into, what you've done via procedures, standards, checklists, audits, that sort of thing. In fact, you might even want to make it a part of whatever, ISO 55,000, 9,001 or 2, 14,000, whatever it is, embed it so that it becomes an institutional, a structural part of what you've accomplished. So Doug, any comments on that?
The manager that said to me that cultural issues are just an excuse to not get things done.
Yeah.
He was one that was struggling with, why don't my tools like root cause or RCM or just in time, why aren't those things happening for me? Why aren't they getting done? Is it, do I got the wrong people in the wrong places? And that was when I brought up culture and got that response back. And my response to him was, all right, so I'm going to ask you about the area that you just had me go into. Can you name for me 5 operators and 5 maintenance people? There's 100 people working in that building. Can you name 5 of them for me? All right. And I got kind of a blank stare. And I said, you need to get to know your people. That will, just that alone, showing an interest, will help change.
Yeah.
Right. Will help start that change. Right. To get to know your people, have those conversations with them. And I hate to make that sound like it's so simple, because it is more than that. And then it comes down to do as you say. Right. You can't say one thing and do another. Right. You can't say I support safety, and then when somebody comes to you with a safety issue, do nothing about it. Right. You have to be a person that has that open door and is interested in what's going on. If people see that, that's a great start right there. Just showing people that you're engaged, that you care. And then, of course, a word that's used a lot these days is transparency, right? When people ask questions, they don't expect fuzzy answers, right? I can remember asking a manager, what's the department look like, right? In terms of finances. And I got a wishy-washy answer. And that was one of those things that told me, right, there's somebody that's afraid to speak the truth, right? If we're doing bad, everyone ought to know it. If we're not doing well, that's something that people need to know. If we're doing great, let them know that as well, right?
Yep.
If we're right on target, that's good information. I'd like to know that.
Yeah. I want to go back to the question that came up about, can you do this remotely? The short answer is no. In fact, that seems to me like my wife told me not to use the word stupid. so I won't use that. So just misguided, you're hoping, right? But the places that I've worked with where I've seen the most so-called cultural change are places where we've applied really simple tools, like 5Y, 5S, standard work, go and see, those tools, those approaches, you can involve, essentially 100% of the workforce.
Yeah.
When you're doing the RCM and Six Sigma and RCA, typically you only involve 5% of the workforce. Well, the things that sustain the change are the things that involve all the workforce in one form or another, over time. And so it's really important that you do that. And that has to be done personally, in the flesh, developing those relationships, seeing with your own eyes the changes and the improvements that have occurred. And so typically what we would do, we would pick a machine, okay? And we would put together a cross-functional team from production and maintenance. And we would say, okay, let's go. We're going to go clean this machine. And as we clean it, we're going to be looking for the defects, the problems. And we're going to restore this baby. Uh-oh. Somebody needs to mute. So anyways, we're going to restore this baby to like new or better. And when we get that done, we pick another one. Next, we might pick, the permitting process, because that's an issue, and particularly in a lot of chemical plants. So we're going to put a cross-functional team together. What is it about permitting that's difficult, that's not working well, and so on? And you just keep picking things that aren't quite right, that will make your life easier, and so on. And as you do that, and as you involve different folks in doing those things, you're going to see a cultural change where people begin to believe that it is in fact possible. So having that face-to-face stuff, I think is essential. I can't imagine you could do this remotely, at least the kinds of things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah. I'm a type of person that says, well, I give you credit for trying, right?
Yeah.
And if you did get some results, that's a great thing. Yeah, good on you. I always, when I'm asked the question, we're again with what's an easy place to start? You and I have talked a lot about defect elimination. The second thing that comes up is non-value added work. Right. If you look at those two things, they're simple and they apply to every single organization. Doesn't matter whether it's operations, sales, the storeroom, everybody has defects. Everybody has some non-value added work that they'd like to get rid of. Right. Open your ears, listen to those conversations. And if you have the power, especially to make those changes, it goes over quite well.
Yeah.
Right. And when, again, even if it's nice to get everybody involved, even if you get a certain percentage and they start telling other people, hey, we finally got one that's willing to listen. Hey, we finally got one that gets things done, that acts on things, that helps. Right. But
Yeah.
the more you can involve, the better off you are. More people you can get involved.
Yeah, Winston LeDay, a friend of mine, really sharp guy, tremendous respect for him. He says, if you want to manage cultural change, everybody in the organization has to participate in at least one improvement activity, at least once per year, for at least 3 years. Now think about the logistics of that. Everybody at least once a year for at least 3 years. So what the point of that being is, you can't just pick a tool that involves 3, 4, 5% of the workforce and expect to have cultural change. Everybody has to participate, which means that the simple tools are going to be your best bet. Now, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't have RCA, RCM, and some of those more advanced tools. You ought to have that. But those simple things are the ones that are going to give you cultural change. They're the ones that are going to engage the most of the workforce, and the ones that are going to create the organizational discipline and the organizational readiness to use and sustain the results of all those other tools. And on top of that, you'll get a lot of improvement done, just by virtue of the fact that people are out there focused on eliminating the defects. So anyways, that's just a really important point. I don't know, did we answer the question from the guy?
Yes.
Who, yeah, okay.
Yep. And what you're talking about, that's another good way to get those people that weren't rowing.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes the most antagonistic people can become the biggest advocates.
Exactly.
I've seen that happen. Now, it doesn't always happen, but sometimes it can happen if you get them. They got all this energy. You got to direct the energy into something that they feel good about, and hopefully it does the company some good too. So,
yeah. Every once in a while, when I'm doing an RCM, I get I'll talk to managers about the team that we're putting together, and they'll say, "Yeah, I got an operator. I think they'd be good, but my gosh, she complains a lot." I say, "Bring them on." Right.
Yep.
I want somebody that's going to speak up. I'd rather have that than somebody that sits on their hands. Right.
Yep. Well, we had a friend of mine over in England, Andrew Fraser. We were working with this chemical plant, and there were 3 or 4 areas of the plant, and we had gone through some of the basics of reliability, how you get it, along with management and all that sort of thing. And they said, well, okay, I'll tell you what, we're going to give you the worst area of the plant. And what this was an area where they would take folks that they didn't really want to fire them, but they weren't happy with them. So this was like a dumping ground. And we got this, but there was no memo that said this. Okay, this was just reflections or comments from people that were in the company that we had talked to. Anyways, they gave us this area, and they thought, oh gosh, boy, this is going to be a real challenge. But the funny thing was, when we started getting those folks who weren't respected, we started showing them some respect. We started getting them involved, started having them do things that they succeeded at. It wasn't overnight, but within a matter of a few months, my goodness, they were just doing wonderful stuff because they felt appreciated and respected and involved and so on. And it was just almost a magical kind of experience. So yeah, you can't do this on Zoom. It just ain't going to happen, So let's see. We got about 5 minutes left, Doug. I've got some things here from Rosabeth Cantor that I can read to folks out there. This is Rosabeth Cantor. She I think she wrote a book called Challenge of Organizational Change. So if you want to stifle change, right? Make sure you don't get it. Here's what you do. Regard any new idea from below with suspicion because it's new and it's from below. Insist that people who need your approval go through several layers of management. Yeah, that's another way to stifle change. I used to tell folks, you see a problem, solve it. If you make a mistake, I forgive you. What'd you learn? What are you going to do differently? Anyways, encourage regular criticism of others' proposals. Well, constructive comment might be a good thing. Criticism might not, Treat problems as a sign of failure, versus opportunity. Criticize freely while withholding praise. Keep people alert, Let people know they can be fired at any time. Control everything carefully, frequently, counting anything that can be. Yeah, well, that's a frustration, One of the things I've observed in companies is that the more you try to literally control folks by putting too much rigidity and procedures and standards and so on, the more you try to control them, the less control you have, because they'll figure out ways to circumvent that. But if they create the procedures and the standards and the checklists, then they own them.
Yeah.
So they're much more likely to follow them. Make sure that all requests for information are justified. Don't distribute information too freely. Shoot, I think you ought to share, most everything that people want, except maybe personnel issues. Make decisions in secret, particularly regarding policies and reorganizations. Surprise people. It keeps them alert. Yeah, right. It keeps them also irritated. Delegate lower level managers the responsibility for laying off, cutting budgets, and moving people around. Then any specific decision that you've made can be denied. And never forget that management already knows everything important about the business. Well, if you've watched Undercover Boss, that's not true. So, all right, that's enough on that. Doug, you got anything else?
Well, I think I've said it twice already. It's important to get to know your people. I could tell you that, I was at Kodak only ever really an hourly employee. I was finishing my degree when I left there, and I had some really good successes along the way, and actually got a chance to have a meeting with our CEO at one point, and had a nice lunch up in his office area. And then when we finished lunch, he kind of toured me around, and we, of course, finished right by his desk. And I asked him if I could have a seat at the helm for a minute. And he smiled at me, and I sat in this chair and then leaned back like I was going to put my feet up on the desk. And he laughed. He says, I've had a number of people in here. He says, you're the first one to do that. He says, there's somebody I won't forget. It was probably a year or so later that I was with my boss, and we were headed somewhere down in the corporate offices for a meeting, and he was coming down the hallway, and as he noticed me, he stopped and pointed at me. He says, "Hey, Doug, how's it going?" We shook my hand, and we had a small conversation, and I introduced the boss, and away we went. Well, when he walked away, the boss looked at me and says, "How the hell do you know Kate Whitmore?"
There you go. Oh, goodness.
So if you can't get him to listen, get him to laugh.
Yeah. One last comment, and this really relates to cultural change, and the thing I mentioned earlier about succession planning. Most organizations, they rotate site managers, VPs, even CEOs. Yeah. I think far too often. Yeah. And so if you're in an operation, you're on the shop floor, and every year there's a new site manager or a new production manager or a new maintenance manager or a new engineering manager, after a while you go, what the heck? It's just another pretty face passing through.
Yeah.
I don't need to
If I
pay
don't-
attention to those guys.
Right. If I don't like what they do, all I got to do is wait. They'll be gone.
Yeah. So it's really important that you have some sense of stability in the management team to create stability in the processes, assuming they're good processes, in order to sustain all this. So I guess that'd be my parting comment.
All right. Well,
All
Ron, it's
right.
been great chatting with you again.
Yeah. See you in a couple of weeks. Next one is on performance measurement, I think. Going to talk
All right.
about measuring performance and how you structure that and all that sort of thing. So, all right, Kim, we're going to turn it back to you.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for another great conversation today. And on behalf of our entire team here at Mobius Connect, thank you to the wonderful audience for joining us too. Just a quick reminder, you can see past episodes of Connect Conversations on YouTube and reliabilityconnect.com. Be on the lookout as new episodes typically air every other Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you are interested in engaging with other industry professionals or would like to participate on the industry's live feed and forums on Mobius Connect, you can visit mobiusconnect.com to create your free profile, and be sure to follow us on social media at Mobius Connect to stay up to date with the latest community happenings. And if you have any questions at all or would like an introduction to Ron or Doug, please email our team at info@mobiusconnect.com. Thanks again for joining us. Everyone have a great day, stay safe, and we will see you in 2 weeks.